Hello and welcome to today's discussion about issues of mental health for Black music creators and industry professionals in the UK music industry. My name is Roger Wilson. I'm co-founder of Black Lives in Music, a new organisation focusing on the issues of racial diversity in today's music sector. This is one of a number of fascinating sessions involving Black Lives in Music, sponsored by Tunecore, powered by Sound City and Guest House. The road to success in any industry involves talent, commitment, hard work, and luck. The road to success in the music industry is at least as tough, but minus the most obvious pathways. Add to that the ongoing issues for people of color, and the journey becomes more one of an odyssey, with violent twists and turns of fortune along the way. It's no wonder that maintaining good mental health can be a problem for Black people in the UK music industry. It's an important consideration given that there are a disproportionate number of Black people suffering with poor mental health in the United Kingdom. Sadly, this is a fact. Earlier this year, Black Lives in Music commissioned a survey on the lived experience of Black music creators and industry professionals. The survey engaged with nearly 2,000 respondents. The subsequent report, now published, has produced key information and an insight into the experience of Black women in today's music industry. I talked to today's guests to discuss the findings of the report and to talk about what can be done to bring about change. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by music psychologist Natasha Hendry. Natasha has worked in the music industry for over 25 years. Alongside performing, Natasha runs a successful vocal coaching practice. She has a first-class honours in psychology with counselling theory and a master's degree in music psychology in education, performance and well-being. Sital Panesar is a counsellor and a psychotherapist, specialising mental health and well-being for creatives. Having worked extensively in the charity and non-profit sectors alongside supporting musicians in private practice, Sital founded Musicotherapy, focusing on the emotional and mental health and well-being of musicians and industry professionals of colour. Joe Hastings is the head of Music Minds Matter at Help Musicians. He was instrumental in the development of the service, which has offered mental health support to thousands of musicians over the past 4 years. He is also an accomplished musician and composer. Michael Ojo is a vocal lecturer and music educator. He's completing a master's in integrative counselling, which explores the theory and practice of multiple psychotherapies. Award-winning psychoanalyst, writer and social commentator Dawn Estefan is a psychodynamic trauma psychotherapist. She's a regular university guest lecturer, as well as an active contributor to social policy change. Notably, Dawn was a roundtable member of the Parliament 2017 Mental Health Act review and the National FGM Action Plan. She's no stranger as a pundit to the BBC and is creator of bold and innovative platforms such as the Black Women's Psychotherapy Group. Last but definitely not least, psychotherapist Franchesca Olaifa. She's the founder of The Soul Surgery, which is a platform that seeks to break the stigma and spread awareness of mental health and improve access to psychological therapies within Black, Asian, and ethnic minority communities. As a songwriter and lover of music, she enjoys working with creatives within the media and entertainment industry and hopes to positively change the way mental health and well-being is viewed within the sector. To all of our guests, I wish you all a warm welcome. Michael, I think if I come to you first, I was particularly taken by a quote of yours, which goes along the lines of, I believe that mental health is the cornerstone to a successful musical career. My goal is to provide a safe space for both musical and emotional development. I think there's something really important to pick up from these sagely words. Good mental health is, of course, key to long-lasting success, but equally, musical and emotional development need to be promoted as equals in importance. I guess what I'm saying is that often the emotional development side of things that is simply not considered in the development of an artist. I just wondered if you had some thoughts on that, Michael.
Yes, I think it's important to recognize that mental health, our emotions, is very much the blueprint of who we are, and very much determines the longevity of not just our our sanity, or even the courage to be able to pursue a career in whatever discipline it is, but obviously today focusing in music. But it is very much the backbone. And when we look at, you know, not to mention any singers, but the careers of some of the greatest, you know, pop stars or artists, you know, who we revere today, there is a common silver thread that oftentimes, what is oftentimes the shortcoming of their career is very much interlinked with some form of emotional deficiency. At the same time as well, it's quite interesting also to point out that oftentimes what propels that talent, or oftentimes, you know, if it's a songwriting or that unique ability, is oftentimes comes from an emotional place as well. So it's almost like a two-sided coin. And I often think about you know, great songwriters like someone like Mariah Carey, who is an amazing songwriter, and the stories which she's able to tell, and just how eloquent she is. You have to think about where that really comes from. It takes a particular skill and a particular level of vulnerability to tap into that place, to be able to unravel those emotions. So all of that to say really that, yes, I think having an understanding of the connection between our emotional health, or our mental health, and our careers and what we produce, I think is very, very important. And I think once we understand that, then we're able to harness the two together.
Thank you for that, Michael. And I really, that does resonate a lot with me in my thoughts in terms of musical development. And Natasha, I just wonder if I could bring you in on that, because I guess when I think about staying with the theme of vocalists and you know, people like Lady Day, Billie Holiday, and the immense amount of sort of emotional baggage that she had to deal with, but obviously wasn't supported with that. I mean, just what thoughts do you have in terms of that, in terms of how we should be helping young artists in that way and giving them support?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, because I think where there's lots of anecdotal evidence that, you know, the stereotype of the angst musician has come about for some reason, and we often talk about that need and that very special gift that artists have to tap into their emotions and help us all to listen to something and be like, I can relate to that, and it's very special. But at the same time, I do think it has caused a barrier to help with mental health. And I feel like we've had this stereotype of the angst musician, and in lots of ways it's almost made it okay for musicians to suffer with their mental health. It's what comes with it. You know, it makes you a better artist. And I think that has perpetuated a little bit of a shut up and put up environment around musicians, which has been quite damaging. Some of the research has started to come through, and it's very late in the day, on looking at the mental health of musicians in particular, has seen that actually, rather than it being put down to some kind of disposition that's inherent in creative people, it's actually more about the environment they're in. Sure. And it's actually more about the work pressures and the unique situation that you find yourself in being in the creative industry. And I think that's what we have to look at, because it's very easy to put the blame and the onus, if you like, on the musician themselves and say, well, this is part of who you are. And actually addressing this may even make your art not as good, not as effective. And I think that needs to be addressed. I think we need to be really careful with that and actually look at what's around the musician, what is inherent, what's unique to this industry and this work environment that a lot of other work environments don't experience, that is actually causing a lot of mental distress.
Thanks for that, Natasha. That's really interesting, and I think just on its own, there's a message there. There's a message there about what the industry, how the industry needs to reprogram its thinking, actually, and give better support. Maybe actually, just while I'm there, Natasha, can I ask: is that a narrative that has begun? Is that a discussion that's begun in the industry that's looking like it has some traction?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, it is late in the day. Some of the original research that was done was about 30 years ago. And
Right.
unfortunately, it was coupled with psychometric tests, which did show that there was a lot of correlations with things like social anxiety, et cetera, in the musician, which kind of supported that stereotype. But what they didn't look at were the environmental and occupational issues around them. So the more recent research has begun, very famous report, the Can Music Make You Sick, which really exposed this shocking amount of mental distress that musicians are experiencing, overwhelmingly depression and anxiety. And what they asked the right questions basically, and they found that a lot of it is to do with the precarity of your finances, of displacement from home, of being in the limelight, of having to compete and be your best every night, all these things that are very unique to this profession. So research is emerging, and I think now that we are more aware that there are some very specific things in the music industry environment that need addressing, momentum is picking up, but there's always more that we can do to actually look at, now we know that these are the issues, how can we best support them?
Thanks for that, Natasha. And just staying with that, Joe, you know, there's fantastic points being brought up there by Natasha, but we're seeing an intersection there, aren't we? We're talking about environment, we're talking about background, but we're also talking about race. And I just wondered, in terms of the work that you're doing at Help Musicians, if you're able to give support more specifically, obviously not just addressing the area of intersection, but you know, we know, for example, that there's a large proportion of people of colour that occupy the more difficult areas of society, the more challenging areas of society.
Yeah, I mean, just going back a step, because something, and I will answer that question, sorry, but it's just thinking about the service that we set up in 2016 in Music Minds Matter. It was a service built on the back of the research which Natasha mentioned, and it was built at speed because we felt we needed to try and address something that was clearly a huge issue in the sector. But what we've done more recently, actually looking at the service and reviewing the kind of the insights that we gathered from people who'd used the service, was to look in more detail at what was valued and where there were potential gaps. And one key finding from that research, which was very much just about people's experience of the service, was that people felt the service was positive, but they would like to engage with therapists, some of whom are in this conversation today, who have experience of working in the industry. And you know, my background is as a musician, but also I trained as a therapist for a number of years. And at the time, kind of, I was quite surprised by that, because I still feel good therapy is good therapy, and it should be right for the individual, and it should be completely centered on how you can best support the individual. But it was telling us something that we hadn't really acknowledged, which was the uniqueness of the situations that people find themselves in this sector. And the reason why I'm saying that, because it might sound like a little tangential, is because what that also told us was that we needed to do further, you know, investigating of what the needs were of particular communities in this sector. So you know, so we know from that research that we did in 2019, where we built focus groups, and we acted on that and built a new service and refreshed the service to make sure that people were able to engage with therapists who had a good knowledge, a really good understanding of working in the music industry, of working in the sector, and were able to respond to the kind of very specific needs of people who are working in this industry, talking about the kind of precarity of employment and the kind of fairly unique environments that people often find themselves in. But the other thing we've been trying to do more recently is look at the kind of in more detail at the types of therapy, the modes of therapy, and how we're getting how we're able to support people to access therapy. So on the surface, if you look at Music Minds Matter and you look at the numbers of people who are using the service, it looks broadly representative in terms of demographics, you know, the geographic regions, and that all feels, you could just look at that and say, well, that looks that looks okay. That looks like we're doing well here. But given what's already been mentioned around, the kind of the potential that people in certain areas of the sector are experiencing higher levels of need, we want to try and do more to ensure that what we're doing is reflective of the needs of people working in certain areas of the sector. So what we've done around trying to build a broader spectrum of therapists who can deliver support to people is offer bursaries through our clinical partner BAPAM. So we see this as a start. This is not this is not us saying that this is going to solve all of the problems of people being able to access culturally appropriate therapy. But one thing that we knew, and you only have to look at the directory of therapists that we work with to see that it's predominantly white and predominantly. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily be able to guess people's class who are therapists who we work with, but it is very white dominated. So we've invested in bursaries to train up people through BAPAM, to train up therapists, good therapists from diverse communities. And the plan with that is to kind of to use this as a stepping stone to build a much more diverse therapeutic pool of people who we can work with. And we hope that that's kind of the start of kind of a growing momentum towards ensuring that we're able to deliver support that's both culturally appropriate, but also reflective of the needs of people throughout the UK. So that's kind of the beginning of it. But like I say, I think this is going to be a kind of a long-standing area of focus for us, and we want to kind of use this as kind of a springboard towards doing a lot more in this area. So I hope that answers some of your question.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I mean, lots of strands for thought there that hopefully we'll have a chance to unpick later on in this conversation. There's a lot there that I think hopefully the wider industry should be looking into and observing and thinking of in terms of best practice. That understanding for review, constant review, and sort of implementing mechanisms that are up to date and are relevant is so important. I just wonder if I could bring Dawn in on this at this point, because I think there's an interesting point there that Joe makes about sort of cultural reference in terms of heritage and identity of those that are practitioners. And of course, there is a real issue in terms of that diversity in the space in terms of practitioners. Yet it's so important. It's fantastic to hear what Joe and Help Musicians have been doing, but we really need to make changes with regards to that in terms of this space. Would you agree?
And definitely, I think just to go back a little bit, there's been a lot of talk around the environment, and the environment, I'm thinking wider as well in terms of societally. The music business often represents or is almost acts as a metaphor for what's going on outside. We also have to remember also that the way that people experience mental health, display the symptoms of ill mental health, and how they express their feelings of mental health can be different from not only individually, but also culturally can be different as well. There's been a lot of talk also about, individuals or organizations setting up outside the industry to support musicians. However, as someone who worked in the industry for 20 years myself, and probably one of the reasons why I became a therapist was because of some of the experiences that happened working in the industry. I think that we have to put some of the onus back on the record labels, for example, to take more responsibility, or for the production companies around and how they realize their dreams around what a show should look like, what it should consist of in terms of looking at Black women, how their bodies should be presented, what should they be, what's deemed sellable. One of the things that I came across quite often was this kind of conflict between the need of the artist and the work task. So the show must go on. So very often having things that really were presented as kind of mental health pathology being kind of written off as creative genius, and knowing that somebody was quite unwell, but actually it didn't fit the schedule, it didn't fit the tour, it didn't fit the moment that we've got to go on stage. So doing everything to kind of help to hide that, to allow someone to, or to make somebody able to perform in that moment of time. I think in terms of practitioners, again, I like the thought of moving outwards and in. When we look at the industry, we have to see, I think it's important to see more people who have the power to make decisions, looking like the artists that are represented. So to have that representation all the way through. And in terms of giving culturally appropriate, or there was something that Joe said about, he still believes that if you're a good therapist, you're a good therapist. And it's one of those arguments that keeps coming back and forth in the industry, in the mental health industry for sure, especially over the last few years, in terms of looking at culturally appropriate therapists in the work. I think there is something to be said for having somebody who has who could help give a shorthand to the things that you're experiencing. A lot of the view of what goes on in the industry, or the industry is a very special place. It's a very special thing. A lot of people fantasize around what the industry about, glamorize that internally if you're not in it. You know, I remember when I worked in the entertainment industry, that there was even a thing they'd say, you know, it's not good to date somebody outside of the industry because they wouldn't really understand the things that you had to do, or you know, or how it went. And I think there is something to having people, not only therapists and psychologists and anyone in the mental health helping field, to have people that reflects the people that are in the industry, but also have understanding about the very unique environment and circumstances that the artist might be in. And not just the artist as well, actually. I also want to add about the level of dysfunction that is with the executives as well, and all the myths that go along with that. You know, TV people do coke, the people lower down the food chain only smoke weed. You know, there's lots of little myths in there that help to reperpetuate, you know, things that are not healthy, and normalizing things that are not healthy, normalizing pathology. So yeah, I agree.
Thanks, Dawn. And I just want to come back to something you were saying there, if I can bring Franchesca in at this point. Just talking about, you know, sort of one industry myths, and also talking about, you know, the show must go on, regardless of how you are. It's been actually something that's you know, I've been around a situation in recent times where I've seen a similar scenario to that. And I want to ask Franchesca, do you actually feel that that the wider industry understands that mental health, or rather mental ill health, is the same as bad as physical ill health? Do you believe that they actually recognize this as you know, something that is serious, that they should really be prioritizing in the same way as physicality?
Unfortunately, I don't think that is true. And it comes back to, I guess, the wider society and how we view mental health and physical health being something that we can see, physical health being something that is very obvious. And when you're impaired by your physical health, there's then a physical limitation. Whereas with your mental health, and when it is impaired, or when you are suffering from a mental illness, because we can't see it, there's an assumption that, oh, maybe it's not as bad as the person's making it out to be. Okay, maybe we can push it a little bit more, you know, the show can go on. But obviously the impact is just as bad. Sometimes it can be worse. And unfortunately, over time, if your mental health deteriorates, you can have a breakdown. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, people don't recognize the gravity of that. With physical health, there's only so much you can push someone, because you're going to say, okay, this person cannot physically move. This person cannot physically sing. They've completely lost their voice. So unfortunately, the same attention and the same weight and, you know, value that we expect should be given isn't. And I think it's really unfortunate, because there's a lot of people in the music industry suffering in silence. I do think another myth as well is that it's only the artist. A lot of attention is always put on the artist, and there's loads of other people who work with artists who are part of the music team that are also suffering, particularly management, because they have the strain from the record company, but also the artists. So they're acting as almost like a parent figure. And that's a lot of stress. But because they're not the main person, they're not center stage, it's almost like their needs are put to the side or put on the back burner.
Yeah, I completely understand that, and obviously we talk in the in terms of the wider community, and the wider community does need to be considered in all of this. Sital, if I just pick up with you, I mean, for me, everything starts at the beginning. There are issues at grassroots level. Poor mental health doesn't necessarily just start in adulthood. Inequality for young creators, starts at this point, as far as I'm concerned, and what I've seen. But there's an intersection with class, which of course is another factor, and I think that's played a bit of a strand so far in this discussion. Surely there are experiences and issues at this level, i.e. grassroots, that set a tricky path ahead in terms of Black music creators and their experience later on in life.
Absolutely. I mean, poor mental health doesn't just suddenly onset, and you're going to have precipitating factors that will worsen mental health and perhaps bring out symptoms of poor mental health. But yes, early experiences, specifically in sort of the more deprived socioeconomic areas, will completely influence how someone experiences their lives and their health. And it really comes down, I'm just trying to pick up on a lot of things that everyone said.
There's a lot there, isn't there?
There is a lot there. And I think, from what Franchesca said, health is health. And, the way that we view mental health, it's as if it's separate, and that comes from early childhood, that actually mental health is a separate thing. It's a separate strand. It's completely on its own. So we think about it differently. But actually, when you have poor mental health, it affects your physical health. And actually, the biggest strain on the NHS is mental health, not through particular mental illnesses, but mental health deteriorates physical health. Mm-hmm. So if we were to implement mental health resources and services from early on, then actually we would be able to offset some of the physical illnesses that come through later on in life. And I'm going to just try and touch on a few things that everyone said, because Joe said also, what makes a good therapist, good therapy is good therapy. And, to some extent, again, like Dawn, I agree, but culturally appropriate and sensitive therapy, it breaks down that barrier, that initial barrier, because, when you have a therapist that says, I come from a particular background and I have this particular experience, that person might be more likely to engage in the services that they might not necessarily have engaged with initially. So yeah, I think I've gone off on a tangent completely. I really wanted to touch on some of those points.
That's great, and I'm very happy for you to feedback on those points. I think there's been some really very very pertinent points to all of this, and it's so important that we do have a moment to go over that. Do you want to come back in with a little bit more, Sital?
I was just going to say, in terms of some of the sort of the issues, if we're talking about young creatives as well, it's all very well putting the onus back on the labels, which is absolutely correct, but we are seeing such an influx of sort of overnight fame, the viral moments where you've got 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds suddenly hitting the spotlight with absolutely no support and no kind of foundation for them to kind of deal with any of that sort of catapult into sort of some sort of temporary stardom, and it's also quite disposable as well. So the as quick as you can be catapulted into that fame, you can quickly fall down. And so what I'm finding as well with some of the clients that I work with is that I'm seeing them at the end as well, when actually that they're out of the industry, so to speak, when actually they're just completely dropped and completely left. Unheld. So it's about what that continued care might look like from the point of entry, or perhaps pre-entry, that's more social issues that need to be kind of more broader, but the point of pre-entry to entry to sort of post completion, so to speak.
Thanks, Sital. That's a fantastic point. Wonder if I could just bring Natasha in on that, because certainly in terms of the commercial sector, that is absolutely the case, isn't it? I mean, I refer to it as pump and dump. You know, the people are pushed up and inflated to stardom, and then when that moment the shelf life ends, it's time to move on. I just wonder what your thoughts were on that, Natasha.
Yeah, I mean, I think several people have picked up on this. Dawn mentioned it earlier, this idea that artists are in a way seen as a product rather than a person. And that means they can be used up and spent, and then we're moving on to the next thing, and not realizing the humanity, the person and the emotional side of that. And I think it's really key what Sital just said then, that often, people are receiving help or seeking help almost when it's too late, when the damage has been done, when they realize they are at crisis point or beyond that. And then they're almost, they get to that point, like Franchesca said, a breakdown point, when they are forced to seek help because they can't function anymore. And what would be wonderful would be to remove this sort of myth of the artist being the product, and realizing that they are a person and we need to look after them, every part of the industry, holistically, the whole person. And that does include management, labels, people. There is being careful not to mention names here, but a well-known talent show for children that I used to work as a vocal coach on and casting. And from day one, I felt extremely worried for these young people that, like Sital said, often are just propelled into this world they are absolutely have no idea about, they're not prepared for. And the things that come with that, we know adults struggle with, and there's very young people that are being faced with this. And I remember mentioning, would it be a good idea to offer at this point, even at audition level, some mental health support? It wasn't very well received or really listened to, but I think that's where things need to happen at ground level, at the starting point, and we need to not let things get to crisis level. And things are beginning to happen. I know on some of the other conversations you've spoken to people from music support, and I know that via them, the MHFA have been offering mental health first aid courses, which I think are fantastic. The whole idea of let's not wait until something awful happens, but let's have people prepared, so when early signs are manifesting, we know what to do. Not necessarily as a wonderfully qualified psychotherapist that we have on this conversation, but people that are there at that starting point, like in an instant, as if there was a physical emergency, you would do what you can to help in that instant, and you would wait for the professionals and you would signpost to that extra help. But if we could create a culture and normalize this awareness and this support for mental health, so that it could be there at the beginning of artists and professionals' career in the industry, I think that would change things. It would take off the strain and absolutely change the life of what it means to be a worker in the music industry.
Thanks, Natasha. And I've picked that point up. I've actually done the MFHA first aid course, and it's quite funny, isn't it? Because when you think of first aid, you immediately think first aid, physically, sort of repairing cuts and healing people who've just done an injury or sort of had an accident or something. But I did the course. It's fantastic, and there's a brilliant manual that goes with it. So I just, as you've mentioned that, and I think it is worth mentioning. It's something I would absolutely recommend, and I hope the industry more widely takes up on it, because it is very useful. I'd just like to come to Dawn now, and we've talked about mental health, we've talked about people of color, but I think we need to kind of grab the bull by the horns here, because what we're talking about effectively in the center of all of this is racism, be it structural or overt. Black people, people of color, are quite simply at a disadvantage in making progress in this business. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, in as much as discrimination does not enhance the individual in the areas of self-esteem or self-confidence. There's some areas here that have all we've already touched on, but I just wonder if you just want to share some thoughts on just that correlation between the business itself and that lack of self-esteem and self-confidence that is a byproduct of the discrimination.
Well, it's interesting because we've been talking about, we've mentioned environment, we've talked about how we can support people, we've talked about perceptions around what mental health is. And for me, mental health very much, and the understanding around it and how we help people is very much a cultural construct. We think about, what can be spoken about, what can be felt, and what can be explored with each other. When we think about society and how structural racism affects individuals in society in terms of seeing themselves reflected in the world outside, and actually what those reflections look like. Is there a wide breadth of people represented in the music industry across the board? Thinking about genres such as classical music and jazz past the 40s. Are we seeing enough people, seeing enough Black people represented? If we're looking in like the management tiers, or we're looking at the people, again, who seem to have power, are we seeing a lot of people that represent the artists who are trying to come into the industry? When we have artists who come into the industry and they start to think about the things that they are that they're told, what they should look like, what their body shape should be. There's been a recent study on kind of like body shape and women and how we should be looking at what's normal, what's the normal way to be. And we look at how people are being marketed, what they're told to do with their bodies, the regimes that they're put through. I've got a few artists on my book, and they're struggling with things around what the industry are expecting them to look like, or what they're supposed to look like on social media. And all of these things start to ebb away at you little bit by little bit by little bit. And that is how we get the imposter syndrome, how people feel that they're there, but they're not really deserving of being there, or they've got to kind of change or manipulate themselves in a way to make themselves acceptable. There also is kind of another theory which works around the false self. And the false self is where you have to change yourself, in a sense, to be acceptable to the other. And I think that a lot of artists that come into the industry are finding that they're moving further and further away from themselves, and are finding it difficult to deal with the pressures, because they're not really, I'm putting it in very simplified terms, but they're not really attached to their core self, because they're so busy trying to be something that doesn't have any foundation. In that, I'm thinking of someone in particular, and she has her artist name and she has her name. And sometimes even in the session, I get a little confused as to, who am I speaking to at that moment? Is the artist name or the artist representation a way that this artist can project all of the stuff that she can't do, or all of the stuff that she'd like to do, into that space, and then maybe keeping a separate self to hold on to all the difficulty that she's having? And as time goes on and as her star rises, she's finding it very difficult to consolidate the two, and feeling very without self, very destabilized and without a core. Then she's got the environment that she lives in that have no idea about the world that she's moving into. So her new parent figures become the people around her who are controlling or helping to guide her career. I shouldn't say control, guiding her career. And again, because she has no connection with herself and she's further away from home, this feeling of, I'm not sure whether I'm okay, I'm not sure whether I can achieve the things that I want to achieve, is always constant. Just to also build on that, what's been said about having people to speak to and having support around you, I think there has to be a different, we have to work continuously on our perceptions of mental health, and that it's not this very Eurocentric model of mental health existing only in the head, that we have to join the head to the body and look at a more holistic way of caring, which is why I like so much what Joe was saying, at looking at different modalities, because it's not one shape that fits all. People express things differently. People, that's why we've got different art forms, different genres of music. And when Sital was talking about how what goes on in the mind can affect the body physically, I then thought about how people sometimes express their mental health through their physical ailments. We're talking about somatic expression of pain. So, and then actually that's more prevalent in certain communities than it is in others. So it's so complex, it's so layered, and it takes for us all to think about it and to look at all the intersectionality of being an artist or being a woman in the industry, or being a man in the industry, being Black in the industry, and what does that mean for you? Because everything's going to have a very separate and very personal narrative for each person. But at the top of all of that, just to round up, is the work that we should all be doing as individuals, everybody in this meeting as well, which is why conversations like this are so important, for us to really start to think about tackling how we think about mental health and opening up conversations so it doesn't become something that is broken off or split off into an outside organization, into the NHS, it's something that we have to work towards making better as a community, because there's a lot of myth and taboo around what mental health is, and a lot of fear. And just like you're talking about in the industry, people are waiting to get into crisis point before they get help. The same is being reflected in Black communities outside of the music industry as well. We present much too late on in services, so that the normal things like being able to ask for therapy, etc., not being picked up because of the stigma that exists around mental health at the moment.
And can I just add, you see that in the statistics. So you see that in actually potentially underreporting of mental health issues in the Black and ethnic minority communities, yet the rates of suicide in those communities are the highest ever. So you see those disparities there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sital. So I just, there was, Dawn, amazing, loads of amazing things in there to really pick up on. I wanted to go back to one particular aspect of this, and I'd like to bring Michael in at this point. Dawn talked about identity and this, the issue of, who you are in the space. And one disturbing finding from the Blim report is in the area of appearance. Nearly a third more Black women than Black men felt the need to change their appearance in order to be appreciated. Having worked in the classical area myself, I felt the need to code switch to become the personality that fits into that specific scenario, because my natural self doesn't fit. I'm not from the traditional background that your average classical player in the UK comes from. These are serious issues, and they simply must play havoc with an individual's sense of identity and ultimately their mental well-being, very much in the way that Dawn has suggested with one of her clients. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yes, just to backtrack a little bit,
Sure.
I just want to touch on the framework in terms of record labels and the music business itself. I think sometimes with these discussions is that sometimes it can come across as very idealistic, because we are dealing here with a business. Yes, the music industry, but necessarily it is a business at its core. And it being a business means that to a great extent, it is very much a transactional relationship between record labels and artists. And the problem here, I think for me, often comes down to the money. Now, if I have made an investment as a label and I've invested £10 into an artist who I see as a product, and you know, from all the research and the data and such, and the planning and all of that stuff, and so forth, I expect to make £50. Now, in my head, all I am concerned with is making the £50. I don't have a allegiance, or I don't have I'm trying to find the word, but it's completely slipped out of my head. I don't, when it comes to the idea of mental health and how you are going to perform, that is not necessarily my concern. My main concern is that I make the profit, which I intend on making. So when the conversation of mental health comes in, from that perspective, and just kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit, it almost seems erroneous, because it has nothing to do with the business format. I personally feel that the only time I think it's going to start to become a bigger issue when we are able to correlate profits and mental health together. And I think when we are able to come up with research that clearly illustrates that if we are able to take care of our artists on an emotional level and physical, that actually this in some way is also going to affect the profit in a positive way. And I know that sounds very crass, but we are dealing with business here. And if every one of us, you know, that does have a business, at some point we have had to deal with the intersection of being emotional and being transactional. And oftentimes we notice that sometimes the best business move we've all had to make at some point is actually being quite transactional. So for example, let's just say, for example, that, you know, as a vocal coach, I have an artist or a singer, whoever it is, you know, and I charge them £20 an hour to come to a vocal lesson. And they have stopped paying for vocal lessons 3 times. And they've said to me that they cannot afford it. However, I have another person who has said to me, actually, I would like to take a vocal lesson, but I only have 1 slot left. And I have an artist here who can't pay because she can't afford it, but I have an artist who can afford it. Now, business sense, you know, business, if I was speaking to a business advisor, it would make very clear sense who I should go for, you know. However, maybe the one that cannot afford it really needs the lesson, because actually maybe that's the one time in her day when she gets to speak, or he or she gets to speak to somebody, and, you know, gets to really pour out. So for me, I'm starting to look at it from the ground up now, that how is it that we are able to kind of merge the two together, that an executive actually can sit down and actually make that decision to say, actually, it is beneficial to put money aside to actually address mental health issues. The second thing I want to quickly make as well, and I can't remember who mentioned it, but somebody mentioned about being on a TV show and suggesting, you know, having some mental health experts. And the first thing that came to my mind was, I'm sure the first thing they probably thought was, where in the budget are we going to find the money for this? You know, I think once again, it comes down to the bottom line. And especially with artists who are not necessarily independent, but are seeking a record label to invest in them, I think it's time that artists begin to also understand that a part of the advance should be set aside for your mental health as well. Because at the end of the day, and I know it's quite a crude thing to say, but only we really can take responsibility for that. And it's as much as we would love, you know, the framework around us, you know, to have our best.
Oh, we've lost Michael's. Michael, you're muted. I don't know what happened there. There you go, Michael. I think you're okay now.
Sorry, the signal went. Sorry.
It's okay. If I could just invite you just to round that up, please. I'd like to bring in Joe to comment on that. But just if you finish off.
Yes.
Joe, can I bring you in there? So Michael's view is, you know, we do need to have a transactional perspective to this. What are your thoughts on that?
And muting. I think it's a really powerful point, well made, and there's lots that I kind of agree with in there. What I am pleased to say is and has happened over the last few years is much more engagement with across the industry in first trying to kind of address some of the key challenges and trying to support some of the key challenges, and that's an ongoing process, and it feels like a really positive step for someone who's worked in this area for 12 years and has has seen how 5-6 years ago this wasn't really a conversation that was happening on this level, and it wasn't something that was being engaged on the level it is. But I think there's a point that I think Sital and Natasha touched on as well around how we move towards support, how we move towards the kind of, it's not just psychoeducation, but improving people's understanding of the challenges, but also how they can manage and sometimes, and maintain isn't the right word, I don't think, but how people can kind of manage and deal with some of the challenges and some of the kind of the highs and lows of this sector, which are quite unique, but also just in terms of their own developmental process. I think in wider society we don't do enough of that. So I think that's something that needs to be instilled. It needs to be kind of a proactive approach, and as that starts to happen, I would hope that that we start to see less people in really difficult situations, because there are too many people who we're working with, and I'm sure we all have examples of really difficult situations that people find themselves in, and I'm not suggesting that it's an individual's fault because they haven't educated themselves. I just think it's something that's ignored, and this industry is tough and challenging, as Michael was pointing out. It's really it's probably even more of a kind of cutthroat industry than it was 20 years ago. But just the other thing I was going to mention, which feels a little, again, sorry, I keep going off on tangents, but I think it is important in terms of something that we've learned recently is also the power of kind of peer support and people being able to talk to each other. Something that we've known for a long time is social isolation in this sector is significant, and you can see why. If you're on tour potentially with 4 or 5 people for 3, 4, 6 months longer, and that isn't that can be a really healthy and collective and collegiate kind of engagement, but it's commonly not. It's often quite difficult and challenging, and you're away from home. And then people who work in kind of composition and other areas, songwriters, spend long periods, as I knew, in a room on your own. And again, it's a reflection of wider society that I think there's an issue in terms of community and building community, and people being able to reflect on other people's experiences that are similar, that are different, and how people have learned and how people have managed and found ways of kind of coping with challenges and difficult situations. But I think there's something in that we're seeing now. We've been piloting peer support groups. We've been piloting wellbeing sessions where we're bringing people together to have conversations around key themes, and just seeing how powerful that can be for people in knowing that they're not alone in their experiences, but also in learning, in learning how other people have managed to either bypass or find ways of dealing with difficult situations is hugely powerful. And there was a piece of research that Nesta did in 2016 about the power of peer support and the impact it can have on communities and people's health. And it's revelatory. If you read it, it's really powerful. I think it's a shame in a way that there wasn't more coverage and it's not being taken more seriously throughout society. But I think in this kind of atomized world, this siloized world where people exist in their own bubbles, there's a lot to be said for bringing people together to share experience. And some of that will be that you hear from someone that the way that they managed a situation, the way that they found the kind of techniques to overcome something that was really difficult is through engaging with therapy, and is through engaging with different forms of interaction with professionals. But that not being there, and I think this is probably of prevalence in kind of culturally diverse communities as well, that not being there it means that people often feel alone, and isolated. And that is hugely detrimental to people's mental health. So it's kind of this vicious cycle of people, not being able to find the right kind of spaces to manage some of the difficult things that kind of crop up in this industry. So I've totally not answered your question, but I thought it was important to kind of highlight some of the things that I also feel need to be addressed as well.
Thanks.
I wonder if I can jump in, Roger.
We're all
we all like say we want to jump in with something. But,
Can I sorry.
Did I say something controversial? Sorry.
You know, when we're looking at something saying it's transactional, I think the point we need to make is it is costly and it does take effort, but we need to do the work. Yeah. And I think this is the thing, it will cost money and people will say, where are we going to find the money for it? But I think what's so powerful about the Blim report is that we've had people say, well, we don't know what the issues are. What are the issues for Black people? Well, now you know. Well, we don't know how to deal with it. What's going to help them? Well, now you know. And now we know this stuff. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm fed up of companies just doing strap lines and having, this is our policy on dealing with racism. We've ticked a box. And actually, it's time to put in the effort. It's time to spend the money and it's time to do the work. So I think we can be quite sort of polite about it and understand that profits need to be made. But I think it's time for real change now as well. And we shouldn't be afraid to stand up for that.
Natasha, I'm so feeling what you've just said. Like I was screaming inside, Michael, when you were saying what you were saying, just because actually what's being reflected outside in terms of the poor parent, which is the motherland, we have to look at the way that we monetize mental health, and actually the big organization, which I won't name, that is in place to look at the health of its citizens, of the people that live here, monetizes mental health. And when you talk about everybody saying, oh, well, what do? We don't know what the problems are. Actually, what's been reflected by society or by the powers that be is that they don't know what the issues are. In 2017, when I worked on the review of the mental health meetings that we were having, we're looking at the same issues that are being brought in, year out, a new report from another organization, the same people sitting around the table, and the same issues are being raised, and they're saying the same things. Oh, well, we can't look at individual stuff because, that's it's not, it's a soft outcome. But what's preferable is to have people in crisis going into being institutionalized, going through a revolving door, coming back out again, and then going back in again over and over again, because we won't spend the money, because where are we going to find the money from? And I just, I agree totally that we've got to stop organizations, including the big health organization that we have here, of which I do work for also. We have to stop saying that we can't find the money, and we have to stop saying that it's too important, and we have to stop saying that we can't really look at diversity, and that we've got this unilateral sort of one fits, one shoe fits all attitude, because actually in the end it is more expensive. In the end, when we look at the artists in the music industry, it becomes more, more expensive, whether it be expensive in terms of publicity or PR for those organizations who have been around, and artists who actually is no longer with us, having to repair all of that. If we look at it that way, it becomes more expensive for the health system that we've got out there, because people are coming in at later stages of their mental health. We have to really start to look at costs in a real way. Sorry.
Dawn, I'm sorry. We've clearly hit a nerve, and I love that. That's absolutely fantastic. But sadly, we are out of time. And I think something I've taken away from this conversation is there is just so much, so many different strands here, so many different perspectives, and they all need to be taken in and considered.
Can I just something quickly? Really,
very super quick, Sital, please.
No, it's just about the transactional thing as well. We need to hold sort of majors and companies and organizations accountable as well, because there is a slight part of that actually labels can make money off of the commodification of people's traumas, right? So actually there is a slight financial benefit to keep them in that state. as well. So now when we know the issues and we know that that's happening, it's up to us to all to say, actually, that isn't right.
Sital, thank you very much. Those really are the last words to bring to an end today's discussion. It was really interesting to hear the views of all of our guests. There's been an overwhelming message from today's session. Mental health is still a real issue in the music industry. The structures, processes, traditions all discriminate against people of colour, and it exacerbate this problem to a disturbing level. Change is long overdue. We must level the playing field and value everyone in our community. Ejecting discrimination from this space is the beginning. It's been an honour and a privilege to be on the call with our guests today. My thanks to Natasha, Sital, Joe, Michael, Dawn and Franchesca. My thanks also to Sound City, Guest House and of course Tunecore. I hope you've all enjoyed the discussion and found it interesting. Please join me again for another of our digital sessions in association with Tunecore. To find out more about Black Lives in Music, please visit www.blim.org.uk. Thanks for being with us and see you soon. Wonderful, thank you.